Princess of Wales have rolled up their sleeves to give back to UK communities following King Charles's coronation. Joined by their children, it marked an important milestone for Prince Louis in particular.
Get lost. William and Catherine finally evicts Camilla's son from estate reserved for Prince Louis. Okay, stay with this for a moment, because that explosive sentence points to something far more serious than a family argument over a room. According to the accounts surrounding this alleged royal dispute, William and Catherine discovered that Camilla's son had been given access to an estate reportedly intended for Prince Louis, and they were not prepared to simply let the arrangement continue. The confrontation had already reached its breaking point when the matter was brought directly before them. The alleged paperwork was on the table. The questions had been raised. The explanations were no longer satisfying. And behind the closed doors of the estate, William and Catherine were reportedly demanding one answer above everything else. Who had authorized their son's supposed property arrangement without properly informing them? What made the situation different was not merely the presence of Camilla's son inside an important royal property. It was the allegation that the estate had been connected to Prince Louis's future use, while another member of the family was reportedly being given access under an arrangement William and Catherine had not approved. That changed the dispute from an uncomfortable family disagreement into a question of authority, inheritance, and who had the right to decide what happened to a place allegedly being protected for the young prince. Hi viewers, if this were your child's place and someone quietly gave it to somebody else without asking you, would you stay silent or speak up? Tell the truth in the comments, because that simple choice says a lot about where you stand. And that is exactly where the tension surrounding this alleged confrontation becomes difficult to ignore. William and Catherine were not reportedly walking into the situation with nothing in their hands. Their advisors had allegedly begun examining the records surrounding the property, looking closely at occupancy arrangements, correspondence, and the chain of authorization behind the disputed access. Every document raised another question. The first concern was simple. If the arrangement was genuinely temporary, why had William and Catherine apparently not been given a clear explanation from the beginning? The second question was even more troubling. If the estate had been considered for Prince Louis's future use, why was another member of the family being positioned inside it at all? And then came the question that reportedly changed the atmosphere completely. Who had approved it? Because according to the account, the explanation being offered was that the arrangement was temporary. A practical decision, nothing permanent, nothing that should have created a royal confrontation. But temporary arrangements usually leave a paper trail. They leave names, they leave dates, they leave correspondence, and they leave someone responsible for saying yes.
Stuff to do with family overwhelms me quite a bit. You know, worry or stress around family side of things, that does overwhelm me quite a bit. But in terms of, you know, doing the job and things like that, I don't feel too overwhelmed by that. Not now, anyway.
William's advisors were reportedly following that trail carefully, and what they found allegedly did not fit neatly with the simple explanation that had been presented to the family. That was when the mood inside the estate reportedly shifted. The matter was no longer being treated as an awkward misunderstanding that could be solved over a quiet conversation. There were now questions about whether the people involved had understood the limits of the arrangement, whether those limits had been ignored, and whether somebody had acted with authority they did not actually possess. Catherine's position in the dispute also carried a deeper emotional weight. The allegation was not simply that an estate had been occupied by someone else. It was that a place associated with the future of her youngest child had apparently become part of an arrangement that had taken place without the family's proper approval. That distinction mattered, because once a child becomes part of the story, a property disagreement begins to feel very different. William could have treated the matter as another complicated palace problem. He could have allowed advisors to negotiate quietly. He could have accepted an explanation and moved on, but the account suggests that he did not. Instead, the alleged discovery forced the family to look more closely at what had actually happened before anyone could decide what should happen next. And that investigation was beginning to expose something much bigger than an unauthorized stay. There were reportedly records that did not line up. There were alleged communications whose meaning suddenly appeared more important. There were questions surrounding the intended use of particular rooms. And somewhere inside that chain of documents was the answer to the question William and Catherine reportedly wanted answered most urgently.
I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. That's the bit that excites me.
Who had decided that Camilla's son could be there? The silence surrounding that question was becoming more uncomfortable by the minute. Because if the arrangement had been completely legitimate, there should have been nothing difficult about explaining it. If everyone involved had followed the proper process, there should have been a clear authorization. If the estate was never intended for Louis, there should have been no reason for William and Catherine to object so strongly. Yet the confrontation was happening anyway, and that meant something was missing, something important. The alleged documents were only the beginning. Behind them was a chain of decisions that had apparently been made long before William and Catherine walked into that confrontation. Someone had opened the door, someone had allowed access, someone had accepted the arrangement, and someone, according to the allegations surrounding the story, had apparently believed William and Catherine would simply accept what had already been done. That assumption may have been the biggest mistake of all. The atmosphere reportedly became colder as the documents were examined again. There was no longer any room for casual explanations. The issue had reached the point where every name mattered and every signature could change the meaning of the entire dispute. Then one detail allegedly surfaced that made the situation far more personal. The disputed arrangement was not simply about where Camilla's son would stay. It reportedly involved space that had been associated with Prince Louis. And once William and Catherine understood that, the argument allegedly stopped being about accommodation altogether. It became about protecting what they believed belonged to their son. That was the moment the alleged confrontation moved toward an ultimatum. The question was no longer whether Camilla's son could explain his presence. The question was whether he had any right to remain. And if the documents revealed what William's advisors suspected, the person who had authorized the arrangement could soon become the most important figure in the entire dispute. So if standing up when someone allegedly crosses a line matters to you, do not just watch silently and move on. Like this, share it, subscribe, and stay with the story, because the next part reportedly reveals the document that made this already explosive dispute much worse. The first document did not settle the dispute. It made the dispute harder to explain. According to the account, the paperwork now under scrutiny pointed toward an arrangement that had been developing quietly, away from the public eye. The property records were not being examined for gossip. They were being examined because the question of possession had become impossible to ignore. A name appeared where advisors did not expect to find it, and that name raised a basic legal question. On what authority had the change been made? That question matters because the estate was not described as an ordinary family residence. It was presented as property carrying a specific future purpose within the royal household. The account connected that purpose to Prince Louis, meaning that any alteration to its intended use would have consequences beyond a temporary family favor. The deeper examination reportedly began with the ownership and occupancy history. Advisors compared the current paperwork against earlier records, looking for the point where the arrangement had changed. They were trying to establish not simply who was occupying the property, but who had decided that occupation could happen. That distinction became crucial. An occupant can be invited. A beneficiary can be named. A manager can authorize access. But none of those descriptions automatically prove that the person receiving access has a permanent claim. The alleged records therefore became a map of the entire dispute. Each document was treated as another step in the chain. The advisors were reportedly checking dates, names, signatures, correspondence, and references to the property's future use. The purpose was simple: determine whether the arrangement had been properly authorized or whether someone had quietly moved beyond the limits of what had actually been approved.
I think when we first started it started as a very small idea with Harry and I scratching our heads going, how can we do something that's going to help us in the future?
Then another issue reportedly emerged. The language surrounding the arrangement appeared to be less permanent than the behavior taking place on the estate. That difference was difficult to dismiss. If an arrangement was temporary, why were there discussions about continued use? Why were rooms being considered for a particular occupant? Why did the records require such careful examination in the first place? Those questions did not prove wrongdoing by themselves, but they gave William and Catherine's advisors a reason to keep digging. And this is where the story takes a more serious turn. The property records reportedly contained references that suggested the estate had been considered within a longer-term family plan. The alleged references did not simply concern present accommodation, they pointed toward future use, which made the dispute involving Louis far more significant. Imagine the difference. A guest using a room for a short period is one thing. Someone being positioned to remain there indefinitely is something else entirely. That distinction was reportedly becoming central to the investigation. The advisors also had to determine whether the people involved had relied on a formal agreement or on private assurances. That question mattered because private promises can create expectations, but expectations are not necessarily the same as enforceable rights. The account suggests that this was where the competing explanations began to collide. One side reportedly viewed the arrangement as a practical solution. The other side saw a decision that had crossed a line. Neither interpretation could be accepted without examining the underlying records. That is why the paperwork became so important. It could potentially show when the arrangement began, who knew about it, what was actually approved, and whether the property's intended future use had been changed. But there was another problem. The more the advisors examined the records, the less convincing the idea of a simple administrative misunderstanding appeared to become. The alleged correspondence raised questions about whether several people had been operating on assumptions rather than confirmed authority. Some references reportedly suggested that decisions had already been discussed before William and Catherine became aware of them. That detail changed the shape of the dispute. It suggested that the issue might not have started with one sudden decision. It may have developed through a series of smaller choices, each one appearing harmless on its own. A conversation here, an instruction there, a request for access, a discussion about rooms, a decision made without wider consultation. Then, eventually, a situation that had become too large to ignore. That progression is important because it explains why William and Catherine's alleged reaction was so firm. They were not simply responding to one isolated request. They were reportedly confronting the possibility that a temporary understanding had gradually been treated as something much more permanent. And then the advisors reached the point that could not be explained away by terminology. The estate's records reportedly had to be compared with the correspondence surrounding the arrangement. That comparison allegedly exposed a mismatch. One document appeared to describe one kind of permission. Other communications appeared to suggest something broader. That was the moment the investigation stopped being about interpretation and became a question of authorization. Who had given permission? What exactly had they approved? And had they possessed the authority to approve it? Those questions now pointed beyond Camilla's son himself. The person occupying the property might not have been the person who created the problem. Someone else may have opened the door. That possibility was enough to change the direction of the investigation. Instead of asking only why Camilla's son was there, the advisors reportedly began tracing the decision back through the royal household. Names became important. Dates became important. The wording of private communications became important. And the difference between an informal understanding and a formal authorization became the central issue. The account suggests that William and Catherine were determined to establish the facts before allowing anyone to reduce the matter to a family quarrel. That was significant, because if the evidence showed that the arrangement had been properly approved, their position would have to confront that reality. But if the records showed that the approval had never been valid, then the entire foundation of the arrangement could collapse. There was still one piece missing: the authorization trail. Until that was identified, nobody could say with certainty who had created the situation. The advisors reportedly knew where to look next. They needed the correspondence surrounding the original decision, not merely the final occupancy record. And somewhere in those private communications was the answer that could determine whether this was a misunderstanding, an unauthorized change, or something much more deliberate. That is why the next discovery carried so much weight. The file that surfaced reportedly contained the name William and Catherine had been trying to identify. And once that name entered the investigation, the dispute was no longer confined to Camilla's son. It reached much closer to the center of the royal family. The significance was immediate. An authorization could explain the access, but it could also expose who believed they had the power to make that decision. Until the name was confronted, the most important question remained unanswered. Who had decided that Louis's future could be altered? If you believe hidden decisions affecting a child's future should never be brushed aside, make your position count now by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Then stay with this story, because the next part exposes what that authorization allegedly set in motion. The name in the correspondence changed the entire direction of the inquiry. Until that point, the dispute could still be explained as a misunderstanding between members of the royal household. But according to the account, the newly examined communications suggested that the disputed access had not appeared by accident. There had been conversations before William and Catherine were informed, and those conversations reportedly involved plans for how the estate could be used. The advisors now had a narrower question: what had actually been intended? They went back through the property material, this time focusing on references to rooms, future occupancy, and the practical arrangements being discussed. The objective was not simply to establish whether Camilla's son had been allowed onto the estate. It was to determine whether preparations had already begun to make his presence more permanent. That distinction became the pressure point. A temporary guest does not normally require a future occupancy plan. A short visit does not normally produce detailed discussions about private space. And an informal understanding should not quietly become a long-term arrangement without a clear chain of authority. According to the account, those contradictions began appearing in the material under review. The advisors reportedly found references suggesting that particular parts of the estate had been considered for Camilla's son's use. The significance was not the existence of a room. It was the apparent assumption that the room could be allocated without first resolving the property's intended future purpose. That brought Prince Louis back to the center of the dispute. The estate had reportedly been associated with a future private use for the young prince. If that understanding was genuine, then changing the allocation without William and Catherine's knowledge would be far more serious than rearranging accommodation. It would mean that somebody had allegedly acted as though the future of the property had already been decided. And that was precisely what William's advisors were trying to establish. The correspondence reportedly offered another clue. The language surrounding the arrangement appeared to rely heavily on the idea that everyone involved understood what was happening. Yet there was no obvious indication within the material described in the account that William and Catherine had formally accepted the change. That gap mattered, because an assumption can survive only while nobody challenges it. Once William and Catherine did challenge it, every informal promise became vulnerable to scrutiny. The investigation then moved from the estate records to the practical steps allegedly being taken inside the property. According to the account, advisors began asking why certain spaces had been discussed in connection with Camilla's son if the arrangement was genuinely temporary. The question was simple: why prepare for tomorrow if the arrangement was supposed to end soon? That question reportedly produced an answer that made the dispute even more uncomfortable. There were alleged indications that the intended use of the estate had been discussed beyond the immediate period of occupancy. The exact significance of those discussions remained disputed, but they suggested that someone had been thinking about a future in which Camilla's son would continue using the property. That possibility transformed the investigation. William and Catherine were no longer dealing only with an existing arrangement. They were potentially dealing with a plan, and a plan requires intention. The advisors therefore began reconstructing the sequence of decisions. First came the access, then came the discussions about use, then came the alleged preparation of space. And behind all of it was the authorization that had allowed the process to begin. Each step made the previous explanation harder to accept. The account also describes a particularly sensitive point involving the rooms associated with Louis. Those spaces were not presented as ordinary spare rooms. They were connected to the future use that William and Catherine reportedly expected for their youngest son. That meant the dispute had acquired an emotional dimension that paperwork alone could not erase. For William, the issue was allegedly no longer simply whether another family member had been given access to an estate. It was whether somebody had treated his son's future space as available for reassignment. For Catherine, the concern was equally direct. A place reportedly intended to become part of Louis's childhood had apparently been drawn into an arrangement that the parents had not approved. The advisors now had enough information to confront the central inconsistency. If the arrangement was temporary, why had future use been discussed? If it was authorized, where was the clear approval? If it was meant to involve only accommodation, why were the rooms associated with Louis part of the conversation? Those questions were beginning to close the distance between suspicion and confrontation. Then came the detail that reportedly made the situation impossible to contain privately. The correspondence allegedly suggested that the arrangement had been treated by some people as though William and Catherine would eventually accept it. That assumption was critical, because it meant the dispute might not have been caused by confusion alone. Someone may have believed the decision could be made first and explained later. That was the point at which William and Catherine reportedly decided they needed the complete authorization trail. Not another explanation, not another assurance. The actual decision. Who requested the arrangement? Who approved it? What exactly had been authorized? And did the person who approved it possess the legal or administrative power to do so? Those questions now had to be answered before the family could move forward. The investigation had uncovered enough to make the original explanation look incomplete. But one final piece was still missing. The person behind the authorization had not yet been confronted with the evidence. Then, according to the account, the advisors found the communication that could change everything. It reportedly did more than identify who had been involved. It appeared to show what had been expected to happen next. And that was where the dispute stopped looking like a simple disagreement over access and started looking like a much larger challenge to who controlled the estate's future. By then, William and Catherine had a decision to make. They could accept another explanation and allow the arrangement to continue, or they could confront the people responsible and demand that the disputed occupation end. They chose the second path. The alleged authorization trail also raised another practical issue. If the arrangement had been approved properly, there should have been a clear record showing its limits. Instead, the account describes documents that appeared to leave room for conflicting interpretations. One communication reportedly treated the access as temporary, while another appeared to contemplate continued use. That difference was small on paper, but enormous in consequence. It meant that the family could no longer rely on a single verbal explanation. The written record had to be confronted as a whole. That is why the advisors reportedly resisted any attempt to reduce the matter to personalities. The identity of the occupant was important, but the process was more important. If the rules had been followed, the evidence should have demonstrated it. If they had not, the evidence would show where the process had broken down. William and Catherine, therefore, had something much more valuable than anger. They had questions that required specific answers, and the people involved could no longer avoid them. And those answers were about to arrive in front of everyone involved. The evidence they carried into that confrontation was about to make the words, "get lost," mean something far more serious than an angry family insult. If you think a child's future should never be quietly negotiated away while everyone else stays silent, prove where you stand by liking, sharing, and subscribing, then stay here, because the next part brings William, Catherine, Camilla's son, and the alleged authorization into the same room. The room reportedly fell silent when the final documents were placed on the table. There was no longer any need to speculate about what William and Catherine wanted to know. The question had already been reduced to a single point: who had approved the disputed arrangement, and why had that decision been allowed to move forward without their knowledge? Camilla's son was reportedly present as the explanation was challenged. The account suggests that his representatives maintained that the arrangement had been temporary and practical. There was no intention, they reportedly argued, to interfere with Prince Louis's future use of the estate. But that explanation now faced the documents. William and Catherine's advisors reportedly presented the correspondence in sequence, forcing the people involved to address what had actually been written rather than what they wished had been understood. The first issue concerned the nature of the permission. If the arrangement was temporary, then its limits should have been clear. If it was simply a short-term residence, there should have been an agreed endpoint. And if it affected an area reportedly intended for Louis, then William and Catherine should have known about it before any change was made. The response reportedly did little to settle the matter. The explanation remained focused on practicality. William's position, according to the account, was focused on authority. Those were not the same thing. A practical decision still requires permission. A family understanding still has boundaries. And a private assurance cannot automatically override the documented purpose of property. Catherine reportedly remained focused on the consequences of the arrangement rather than the personalities involved. The issue was not whether Camilla's son deserved somewhere comfortable to stay. The issue was whether another person's accommodation had been secured by using space that had allegedly been set aside for Louis. That distinction became impossible to avoid. The advisors then reportedly introduced the next piece of evidence. It concerned the way the estate had been described in internal communications. The wording suggested that the disputed use was not being treated as a casual visit. There appeared to be an expectation that the arrangement could continue beyond the immediate period originally described. That was the contradiction William and Catherine had been looking for. If the arrangement was temporary, why was there discussion about its continuation? If there was no intention to interfere with Louis's future use, why had his space reportedly entered the planning process? And if everyone understood that William and Catherine had the final say over their son's future use of the estate, why had they not been consulted before the arrangements began? No answer could make all three questions disappear. The atmosphere reportedly became increasingly uncomfortable. Then William allegedly turned the discussion toward the authorization itself. That was the critical moment. The identity of the person who had approved the arrangement was no longer being treated as a secondary detail. It was now the central issue. The account suggests that the approval had been connected to Camilla's side of the household, but the precise authority behind that approval remained disputed. That distinction mattered because the existence of a signature or instruction did not automatically establish that the person giving it had the right to change the property's intended use. William's advisors reportedly knew that. So did the people sitting across the table. The conversation therefore shifted from, "Was permission given?" to a much more difficult question: was the permission valid? That single distinction changed the balance of the meeting. An informal authorization could explain how Camilla's son gained access. It could not necessarily explain how he obtained a right to remain. The account suggests that this was where the confrontation became personal. Camilla's son reportedly objected to the implication that he had acted improperly. From his perspective, the arrangement had allegedly been presented to him as legitimate. If he had relied on assurances from senior members of the household, then he could argue that he had not secretly taken anything. But William's position reportedly cut through that defense. The question was not simply whether he had believed the arrangement was legitimate. The question was whether the arrangement itself had been legitimate. That left the occupant and the authorization on two different sides of the same problem. One person could have relied on an assurance. Another person could have given that assurance. But neither fact automatically created a permanent right over the estate. The alleged evidence therefore placed responsibility higher up the chain. And that was where the family tension became unavoidable. King Charles was reportedly confronted with the circumstances surrounding the arrangement. The account suggests that his position was difficult because any private understanding he may have given could not necessarily settle the legal or administrative questions surrounding the estate. That left the king facing an uncomfortable choice: defend the arrangement and risk challenging the documentation, or acknowledge that the arrangement had gone further than intended. The reported response was cautious. The explanation was that nobody had intended the situation to become a major dispute. But that answer did not address William's central concern. Intent was not the only issue. Consequences mattered. The alleged result was that a property associated with Louis's future had been placed into an arrangement William and Catherine had not knowingly accepted. And by that stage, William reportedly had no interest in hearing another promise that everything would somehow be sorted out later. The account portrays him as having reached the point where negotiation had ended. The disputed access had to stop. That was when the meaning behind the title finally became clear: "Get lost." The phrase was not presented as the beginning of the confrontation. It was the end of it. Everything had supposedly led there: the documents, the conflicting explanations, the questions about authorization, the concern surrounding Louis, and the growing suspicion that a temporary arrangement had been allowed to develop into something much more permanent. William reportedly made it clear that the disputed occupancy would not continue. The account says the message to Camilla's son was direct. The arrangements surrounding his stay would be terminated, any associated plans would have to stop, and the estate would return to the purpose William and Catherine believed had originally been intended for it. There was no longer a question of waiting for another review, no more room for another informal promise, no more assumption that the matter would simply disappear. The alleged confrontation had reached its final stage. But there was still one problem. Removing Camilla's son would end the immediate dispute, but it would not answer the larger question of how the situation had been allowed to happen in the first place. If the authorization had come from inside the royal household, then simply ending the arrangement would leave the same weakness exposed. Someone could try again, someone else could make another private decision, and the same estate could become the center of another dispute years later. That meant William and Catherine reportedly had to think beyond the eviction. They had to decide what would happen to the property itself. The account suggests that this became the final strategic question: how could the estate be protected from another private arrangement? How could Lewis's alleged future connection to the property be protected? And how could the family prevent another informal promise from creating the same crisis? Those questions were waiting for an answer as the confrontation came to an end. Camilla's son had reportedly been told to leave, but the real battle over the future of the estate had only just begun, because William and Catherine could remove one occupant in a single day. Protecting the property from another disputed arrangement would require something far more permanent. And if you believe a family should protect a child's future instead of quietly surrendering it to whoever has the strongest connections, do not just watch this part and scroll away. Like, share, and subscribe to make your position count, because what William and Catherine allegedly decided to do with the estate after the eviction was even more consequential. The estate was quiet after the confrontation, but the dispute was not over. The alleged eviction had answered one question: Camilla's son would no longer remain under the disputed arrangement. But William and Catherine still faced the problem that had brought the entire matter to a head in the first place. How could they make sure the same situation did not happen again? According to the account, the answer began with control over the property's future use. The immediate priority was reportedly to restore the estate to the purpose William and Catherine believed had originally been intended. Any arrangements connected to the disputed occupancy had to be reviewed. Any access granted under that arrangement had to be reconsidered. And any plans that assumed Camilla's son would remain had to be brought to an end. That was important because simply asking someone to leave would not necessarily prevent another disagreement. The deeper issue was the process that had allowed the dispute to develop. If private assurances could create expectations about the property, then another family member could eventually rely on another assurance and attempt to claim the same kind of access. William and Catherine therefore reportedly wanted the estate's future use made clearer. The account describes the disputed property as being tied to Prince Louis's future, which meant the family's objective was not simply to regain control of an empty building. It was to protect the purpose attached to it. That changed the significance of the final decision. The question was no longer, where will Camilla's son stay? It became, who decides what this estate is for? That question reaches far beyond one family argument. It concerns authority. It concerns succession. And it concerns whether informal promises can override arrangements that were supposedly established for the future. The account suggests that William's approach was therefore deliberately broader than the eviction itself. He reportedly wanted the property's management and future use placed under clearer safeguards so that another private arrangement could not quietly emerge. That would also give Catherine and William greater confidence that Louis' alleged future connection to the estate could not simply be rewritten through a series of informal decisions. The consequences for Camilla's son were immediate. The disputed accommodation was no longer available to him under the arrangement that had triggered the confrontation. The access connected to that arrangement was reportedly terminated, and the plans associated with his continued presence were brought to an end. The symbolism was difficult to miss. A place that had reportedly been treated as available to him was being returned to the purpose William and Catherine believed it was meant to serve. The same property that had caused the family dispute was now becoming evidence of how quickly assumptions could collapse when they were challenged. But there was another consequence. The alleged confrontation had exposed a serious weakness inside the family's decision-making. Too many people had apparently been relying on what someone else had said. That was dangerous. Because once a private assurance becomes the foundation for a major property decision, everyone involved can begin behaving as though the assurance is legally permanent. That appears to be the central lesson of the dispute. The account does not describe William and Catherine as simply protecting a room for Louis. It portrays them as challenging the assumption that the future of the estate could be decided informally. That is why the alleged eviction carried such weight. The phrase, "get lost," was the most memorable part of the confrontation, but it was not the most important part. The important part was what came afterward. The family had to confront the consequences of the decisions that had already been made. The estate needed clearer protection. The disputed arrangement needed to end. And the people responsible for the original authorization needed to understand that an informal agreement could not simply be treated as a permanent right. The account then brings the story back to the person at the center of the future use of the estate, Prince Louis. He had not reportedly been part of the negotiations. He had not made the disputed decision, and he had not created the family conflict. Yet his future was repeatedly used as the reason for William and Catherine's resistance. That gave the ending a different emotional weight. The dispute began with adults arguing over authority. It ended with the future of a child being used as the reason to draw a line. And that is why the alleged confrontation became bigger than the estate itself. For William and Catherine, the issue was reportedly about whether Louis would inherit the benefit of an arrangement that had been intended for him, or whether that arrangement could be quietly redirected towards someone else. For Camilla's side, the dispute represented a challenge to an arrangement that had apparently been allowed to develop through private expectations. For the wider royal household, it exposed something even more uncomfortable. Family relationships do not erase property rules. Personal promises do not automatically create legal rights, and an arrangement that seems harmless at first can become explosive when the people affected finally ask to see the documents behind it. That was the real turning point. The alleged eviction may have lasted only a short time. The consequences could last much longer, because once the paperwork had been examined, once the authorization had been questioned, and once William and Catherine had reportedly refused to accept the arrangement, the family could not simply return to the way things were before. The old assumptions had been challenged. The estate had become a symbol of that challenge, and the question of who controlled its future had moved directly into the center of the dispute. That is also why the title matters. Get lost was not simply a dramatic phrase attached to a royal family argument. According to the account, it represented the moment William and Catherine allegedly refused to accept a decision they believed had been made without proper authority. The estate was reportedly reserved for Louis's future. Camilla's son was allegedly given access. William and Catherine allegedly discovered the arrangement. Their advisors reportedly traced the paperwork. The authorization became the central mystery. And when the explanations failed to resolve the problem, the disputed arrangement was ended. That sequence is what gives the story its force. It is not simply about who was inside a royal estate. It is about who had the power to decide who belonged there. And perhaps most importantly, it is about what happens when someone finally refuses to accept an arrangement that everyone else has quietly allowed to continue. For viewers watching this unfold, there is one question that remains impossible to avoid. If William and Catherine were genuinely convinced that their son's future use of the estate had been compromised, were they right to take such a hard line? Or should the family have found a quieter solution before the dispute reached the point of an alleged eviction? That is where the story leaves the audience. Not with a simple victory, not with a simple villain, but with a royal family forced to confront the consequences of private decisions, competing expectations, and a property whose future had apparently become more complicated than anyone expected. And if you believe that decisions affecting a child's future should never be made behind closed doors without accountability, then do not let this story disappear without taking a position. Like this video, share it with someone who follows the royal family, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications. Staying silent may allow the same kind of controversy to be forgotten, but standing with the facts keeps the pressure where it belongs. Stay subscribed, because the next video coming on this channel goes even deeper, and what comes next is reportedly worse and far more revealing.